Thanks for joining us again at the Clive Barker Podcast. Did you subscribe yet? If you have, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Episode 317 is for the hardcore fans. Jose and Ryan dig deep into the 1983 play Colossus and the life of the painter Francisco Goya that inspired it. This plus some Candyman and Hellraiser news at the top. This episode is sponsored by Don Bertram's Celebrate Imagination. Don Bertram's Celebrate Imagination shop is dedicated to benefiting the Arts and Medicine program at Texas Children's Cancer Center. Up to 50% of the proceeds will support the program where artist Don Bertram volunteers monthly. Don Bertram is a longtime friend of Clive and celebrates and continues to be inspired by his art. He uses that inspiration to help kids through the Texas Children's Cancer Center, and we couldn't be more thrilled to continue to work with him. There's a new feature video that shows Don working with the kids at Texas Children's Cancer Center and his artwork. Click the side banner at www.clivebarkercast.com to find links to videos and his Etsy shop where you can buy his prints, books, and support this wonderful program. Check out his most recently shared painting, Sky Egg, homage to Barker, shared on our Facebook page or on his Etsy shop. We have a pretty big episode coming up with Colossus, but we have some news that we haven't looked at for quite a while, so we'll try to kind of go over this here really quickly, too.
News from the Reef. Beep, 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 beep.
Yeah, so Candyman. Candyman news I've been sort of avoiding now because it's getting so close to the release that I'm afraid things are going to start getting spoiled.
I know.
But what we do know is that this is more a direct sequel to the first movie than it is like a remake. It's not a remake.
Right.
And the evidence of this is just one line. And we've got a link to this Bloody Disgusting article. The line is, I'm presumably by Anthony's mother, is saying to Anthony, Helen Lyle was out here looking for Candyman, and I say she found him.
Right. And then it goes through the story of Coleman Domingo's character, Burke, relating who he thought Candyman was. And that's a cool story about a guy with a hook for a hand and a big furry coat that gave candy to kids. And then one day someone got a razor blade in their candy, and then he saw that guy, Sherman Fields, one of the many Candyman figures, come out of the wall inside his Cabrini Green project, and the police got him and killed him. And then a few weeks later, more razor blades showed up and more candy, so he was innocent. But it's cool that they made that connection to Helen Lyle, played by Virginia Madsen.
And that feels like a more sort of intimate Cabrini Green version of the Candyman origin, right? I mean, it's because we have that story. We have the painter, painting the woman and who got pregnant story. And then in number 2, they say that took place in New Orleans. But here, this addresses this story that's really localized to this this particular Cabrini Green project and who Candyman is to them.
So I just want to bring up something here, which I know it's confusing. I myself have the same interpretation that you have of that. But when we see in Candyman 2, Danielle Robitaille being lynched, it's not supposed to be New Orleans. Because in the interview that Ed Martinez did for Cenobium with Bill Condon, who directed Candyman 2, he says at one point, when Ed asked him, can you tell me about the sequence involving Candyman's origin where he gets his hand sawed off and the beasts kill him? And he says, yes, it's odd because the action is like a lynching. The mind immediately assumes that you're somewhere in the South, but actually you're flashing back to the setting of the first movie, Cabrini Green, Chicago. The setting of this film, the sequence began in New Orleans, which was his birthplace, and then made its way to Cabrini Green where the character dies. So the first challenge is finding anything that would suggest the wide-open expanse of Chicago of the 1890s in modern-day Los Angeles. And that's when they went there. It said, the only thing we did find is one field that reminded me a lot of the type of fields that we are in the film Days of Heaven. So that became sort of our look more than anything else. Where Cabrini Green was in the 1890s was actually a place called Helltown, which was a ghetto for Italian immigrants that was really quite dangerous. I'm also when I saw that movie, I thought, oh, yeah, that's New Orleans, and now he was lynched in the South.
Yeah.
But apparently the intention from Bill Condon was to make it seem like it was Cabrini Green location in the past.
So then after the first movie, the ghost character of the Candyman moved to New Orleans?
He's following the protagonist of the second movie, right? So he went back to the place where he was born.
Yeah.
But apparently that's not where he died. He died in the area of Cabrini Green. I know it's weird. It's confusing, right? It's a little confusing.
Well, and I always just explained it by, he could have a bunch of conflicting origin stories, and that's fine because that's what he is.
Sure, of course.
He's an urban myth come to life.
And this new clip from the upcoming Candyman also kind of brings more into that, like Burke saying that, to me, Candyman was a guy called Sherman Fields. And it's like just some dude with a hook for a hand and gave candy to kids.
Yeah, so not Daniel Robitaille.
Yeah, and in the first movie...
Or maybe they both are, right?
Yeah, and in the first movie, we got that story of the little kid who went into the bathroom and got his genitals cut off.
Yeah.
And, all those people wearing jackets that are like in the lineup saying, I hear you're looking for Candyman, bitch.
Right. And so all these horrible things that happen add to this myth of Candyman and sort of feed the entity. Whether he committed those acts or not doesn't even matter.
That's right.
Yeah.
But speaking of Virginia Madsen, what's really cool is that now with Candyman coming out and all this stuff, and the fact that her character is mentioned in the new Candyman film, and if you're also a Dune fan, she's Princess Irulan in Dune.
Yeah.
You can meet her in Texas Frightmare Weekend this year. So yeah, the Texas Frightmare Weekend Facebook page says, we just received confirmation this morning that Virginia Madsen wants to reconfirm her canceled appearance. It's so great to have her back. Virginia is known for her iconic role of Helen in Candyman, plus roles in David Lynch's Dune as Princess Irulan, Electric Dreams, Zombie High, The Prophecy, The Haunting, and so many more. So go to Texas Frightmare Weekend's page, and you can get to meet her and get something signed by her.
That was news from about a month ago. So we just have gotten a little behind on the news, but I think that's cool. That'll be great. I'm jealous of anybody that gets to go to Texas Frightmare Weekend. I loved it when we went there. I would love to go back, but it's hard. It's a hard thing to put together, and it takes a lot of money. Yeah,
and you're in Alaska, so you'd have to fly 12 hours.
Well, yeah, and then you'd have to fly at least
Ohio.
At least a couple hours, right, to get there. And
that's true. Yeah. That's true. Yeah. Well, maybe in the future when things get better. Yeah. So this year is still recovering from a lot of stuff that went wrong.
In really, really old news, we reported this way back on April Fool's Day in 2018. Pinhead is confirmed to be in the Dead by Daylight game.
Yeah, we actually almost don't have to change anything if we wanted to put the news out. Because back in 2018, our April Fool's joke, written by Rob Ridenauer, was that Pinhead is coming to Dead by Daylight.
Yeah.
And that he was going to be in an original map based on the Labyrinth from Hellbound Hellraiser 2 in a DLC package called the Hellraiser Chapter. Yeah, and I made a little image to go with that with Paul T. Taylor's Pinhead in front of a Dead by Daylight screenshot. Now it's true. It is true. And there's even like footage of Pinhead, footage from Pinhead in Dead by Daylight. He's got some weird perks. He can hook up people, and then people get suspended with chains, and then he summons a torture pillar from the ground. And it drags the person into the ground, and the portal closes. Oh, so cool!
Yeah. This is some kind of a survival horror like multiplayer game, from what I understand. I think I don't know anything about this game.
Yeah, it's a popular multiplayer survival horror game. Yeah. I've never played it either, so unfortunately, I don't, know much about it. But that's pretty cool.
I'll looks buy the PlayStation 4 version, and then maybe we can make a video of it. That'll be fun.
There is a video in that Gaming Verdict website news. There's a little video that someone tweeted from the Dead by Daylight account. And you can see him like summon the torture pillar and take the player down into hell. Yeah. That's so cool. Oh, and it says more. Here are the powers that he has. So when you click the power button for the Cenobite, they create a gateway. And then from it, a chain can be directed to bind a survivor. A survivor can be bound up with 3 of these extra dimensional chains. There's also a lament configuration. So it's the puzzle box that will call forth the Cenobite character, which spawns on the map. If it's picked up by a survivor, they'll be chased by chains, and Pinhead will be able to teleport to them. Okay. Survivors need to solve the lament configuration puzzle to be able to drop it. That doesn't make any sense. If you solve the puzzle, that's when he shows up.
Well, I think they're saying that they already summoned him, right? And so now they have to. You can't just throw the puzzle box on the ground. You got to solve it again to send him away. Like the end of the first movie.
Yeah, there's another power called Scourge Hook, the gift of pain. At the start of the trial, up to 4 random hooks are changed into Scourge Hooks. One of Pinhead's perks allows him to see which hooks are considered Scourge Hooks. I have no idea what this is. But anyway, if you're a player of Dead by Daylight and you're a Hellraiser fan, I bet you're super happy right now.
Yeah, right. So it wouldn't hurt for us to take a look at this at some point here in the near future. One other thing that I added on here, there's a Facebook group called the Clive Barker Book Club. They asked me to be an admin on it. And the Clive Barker Book Club is starting with Books of Blood Volume 1 starting today. What they do is they have everybody read the same book, and then in about a month, then everyone starts discussing it. So that kind of made me think, I can just post a link to our episode about that. And then I remembered that's, I think, episode 2. So, which is not going to sound, that our sound quality is not going to be very good. It'd be interesting to go back and listen to that again.
Yeah,
and we were brand new to podcasting.
Hey, just post our podcast website there, and then they can go through the episodes and see what we're all about.
Oh yeah, I've done that, and the person who started it, she did too. So
I saw the plans for this. I saw a discussion in one of Clive Barker groups about, hey, do you think it's a good idea? Who would join this group for a book club? And I was like, oh, okay, another group. But, I just joined it because, hey, why not? It sometimes you get to read people's reviews and people's discussions about certain books that you've read. And sometimes they bring up interesting points that you've never actually considered.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it would be neat if we could follow along and cover these books as they go along. But honestly, I don't see how we could. We just can't. We've got so much other stuff that we're doing.
We already did that in the podcast, and it would be no. There's a lot of episodes, though. If you guys were listening to this and you're in that book club, search our podcast website blog and look up for the name of the book that you want to see if we discussed. We pretty much discussed every book. We're finishing up these playbooks now, and that's pretty much it. I mean, there's nothing else that we haven't discussed.
Right, yeah. There's a couple of movies that Joe and Catalina brought to our attention that we never actually did commentaries for, right?
That's right.
Really obscure ones.
Jojo Baby?
And Mule Skinner Blues.
Right. We got to watch that. I got a copy of that.
Yeah. So Clive was kind of a producer for those, so I don't think he's as directly involved. But it'll be interesting to. I mean, we did do Gods and Monsters, which is a great movie, so it'll be interesting to see those as well. Yeah,
could be coming up in the future, so keep tuned for that.
Yeah. This episode, we kind of did a last-minute pivot, so we haven't talked about doing this at all on the podcast. But what we're doing is we're revisiting the playbook, Incarnations. My chair's squeaky today. We're revisiting Incarnations, and the very first play in that book is Colossus. And we kind of skipped around when we did our play coverage in the past of those two books from 1995, Incarnations and Forms of Heaven. But yeah, now we're finishing up our coverage of that book, after years, and covering the play Colossus.
That's right. So those two books, they had about 3 plays each, and I think we've done 3 plays from those 2 books, and there's still 3 plays to go. So this is one of the plays that's going to complete the Incarnations volume. Yeah. And it's, like you said, it's Colossus. There's not a lot of supernatural elements. There's not a lot of stuff that's fantastic, like in other plays, like the History of the Devil or the Crazy Face, and stuff like that. But this one, does seem to follow a little bit of that tradition of the Grand Guignol Theater, which Clive also did in Frankenstein in Love. So we're in the middle of a scene of war and death, flies and gore, soldiers and rebels. And it involves Goya.
There's a lot of indifference to human suffering and violence from, on the part of the characters.
Yeah, on some of the characters, yeah. But a lot of focus on the part of one of the protagonists, which is Francisco Goya, the painter.
You know, what I was thinking, what made me think of, what this made me think of is, in some ways, Clive's not so different from us, right? I mean, this is his Clive Barker podcast in a way, right? This is his loving tribute to Goya.
Sure,
I think.
Yeah. In preparation for this episode, I have a book. I have a big hardback book about Goya's life and paintings. And I was reading Colossus, and I was like, in the intro, Clive does say that there are moments in here. Says there's not a lot of fantastic stuff in Colossus, but there are definitely dreams and references to paintings scattered throughout. And it is true. We'll get to that while we're discussing it. But,
well, and those intros are interesting because they're not meant for fans exactly. Those intros are written for people who are producing their own versions of the plays.
Yeah. He says, in writing the play, my central challenge was how to create a portrait of Goya and his world without falling prey to the cliches of biographical fiction. Scenes of famous folks meeting more famous folks at historically significant events. The solution I decided was create a drama in which Goya was effectively invisible most of the time, a situation which would allow me to explore the idea of the painter as a witness to events he could do little or nothing to influence. Yeah, so that's what happens here at the beginning.
You had mentioned that there's references to his paintings, and so after I read the play, I went through and just Google searched, because I don't have a hardcover book, Google searched a bunch of his paintings. And then, worked my way backwards, and definitely you can see references to the paintings. There's that painting that has a date. It's like May something, 18 something or other. I forget the name of that painting, but it's soldiers pointing guns at these people who are holding their hands up, and some of them are lying on the ground dead, and there's blood. And
oh, yeah. So that's there's a couple of paintings. One of them's called the 2nd of May. The other is called the 3rd of May. The 2nd of May is when the Spanish people attacked the Turkish soldiers in Napoleon's army, and they stabbed them, and there was just a gory, violent, guerrilla-like attack. And then the 3rd of May is what happened the next day. So Napoleon's troops gathered up and rounded up the rebels and gathered thousands of Spaniards and just shot them, firing squad executions and stuff. And that's that's the painting that you're talking about, where the guy has his arms up in a white shirt, and there's a bunch of like Napoleon soldiers who are almost like they're almost like a block mass of people with their backs turned to us and their guns pointed at the very vibrant, very emotional, like Spanish. And it looks almost like a machine. Right? Yeah. They're like a machine killing them, and it's a very shocking painting.
It is, and it's an interesting interpretation. The way that through the course of the play, it was interpreted that these were a bunch of actors. I mean, not interpreted; it's fictional, right? But that those people were actors, and someone had kind of whispered into the ear of the soldiers that Castropol had whispered into the ears of the soldiers because he owed these actors money he'd stolen from them. So he whispered to the soldiers that those were rebels, surrounding us. They're everywhere, and got the soldiers all freaked out, and they just started firing.
They say that even though Spain is such a big Catholic country, which still had the Inquisition all the way into the 1800s, which nobody expected, the French were very superstitious, and they're always painted in this very superstitious light throughout the play, and whatever, that they believe in ghosts and stuff. But of course, the rebel Spaniards, they're like, I don't believe in anything. I'm just ready for whatever comes down, and I can scare the French soldiers. And there's even like this guy Raphael and Felipe, these two guys in the play that boast about howling in the night and scaring French soldiers when they were occupying a city in Spain.
Being jumpy and that fear of the supernatural, really, that's the most supernatural that we get in this play, is just people getting tricked into believing that there are monsters and ghosts and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's right. Goya was a complicated person in the sense that he started out a little bit as he started out making cartoon paintings for like tapestries. And when I say cartoons, I don't mean like Mickey Mouse. I mean basic paintings that were just feel-good paintings, like dogs and people hunting or people having lunch under a tree and stuff like that. So they could make tapestries of that to sell to noblemen. Then once he got enough in with the aristocrats and the nobles, he became the court painter in Spain. And that's when he really, got into the whole aristocratic stuff. He was very much a man who believed in the Enlightenment ideas. As such, he felt an affinity to like the French and their ideas of, Enlightenment. However, the French did invade Spain, and that kind of left him very, very disappointed about that, even though he defended the reforms of the Enlightenment. But then he saw what war would do, and he came to terms with what's it like to live in a country occupied by another foreign power. So that really disappointed him a lot. And he had a sickness when he was in his when he was a young man, and that left him deaf right at the peak of his height and fame, and when he was like really getting in there and making good money, enjoying life. He got this sickness, and it might have been some sort of neurological thing because it said that he had temporary blindness and, he was very sick, and it also affected his hearing. And so it might have been something neurological, maybe a small stroke, maybe some weird kind of neurological illness. And everything returned to him except for the hearing. So for the rest of his life, he was very deaf, which also kind of put him more in touch with his inner life, his inner self.
Yeah. This was one of the later plays that the Dog Company did, and they performed it at the Cockpit Youth Theater in 1983. I don't know how many performances they did. One shocking thing about this play that it's really unexpected is there are 45, I counted them, there are 45 characters in this play.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot to keep track of, and a lot of them are different soldiers, different servants to the Duke. And the play opens with in a Duke's mansion is sort of bombarded by cannon fire. And so the entire play pretty much is digging up bodies out of the wreckage of the house. And people having to deal with trying to figure out who's dead and who's alive, and digging people out of the wreckage, and the Duke sort of goes crazy a little bit and wanders off. He wants to find his wife.
Yeah. He definitely says here at the beginning, the introduction for Incarnations, he says, "The play was written for a large cast and needs numbers to make it work. This is not a piece that can be mounted by a cast of 10, however hardworking. But for the right ensemble, driven by the desire to create an ambitious piece of environmental theater and immerse themselves in Goya along the way, the piece is quite an adventure." And 45 characters, that's a lot.
Well, and there's one or two of them that are dead from the start. So
there's several.
But not too many. I mean, a lot of them are actual living characters.
Yeah, so like you said, it starts off with an idyllic scene. There's like birds singing and music playing, and it's a warm, sunny day, and all of a sudden you hear like, boom, and this house full of French pieces of art and very rich looking mansion crumbles, and the first act opens immediately with that act of destruction. And that kind of sets the tone for it. And there's people who are dead. Some people are trapped under rubble, and one of them's already dead. It says here there's a thief, which we'll find out.
A trio of thieves.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so the Duke is Duke Damaso. His wife is called Luisa. She's like an 18-year-old or 19-year-old duchess.
Yeah.
And the Duke is an old man. The Duke's mother.
And his mother.
His mother, Donna Pasquala, is this crazy, soft-brain lady who's missing a leg and is very, very sassy. And she's in touch with the old ideas, almost witch-like. When there's a part here where she says that the teeth of corpses who died by violence, if you grind them up with wheat and whatever and give it to your boyfriend, it will make him like it's an erectile dysfunction thing. It will fix it. And it's such a witchcrafty kind of thing,
Yeah.
The Duchess is accompanied by what's called a Celestina, which is usually they call a Celestina like a madam. That would be the equivalent in the English language. So it's an old, ugly lady who ran a brothel, and it's kind of implied that the Duchess might have had some experience with that sort of thing before she became a Duchess, that this Celestina might have been the woman who introduced the Duke to this hot, beautiful, very, very attractive young lady to marry.
But then the Duke wants her to be faithful, even though he's like almost 60 and she's 18.
Right. And Goya was painting her portrait at the time that the house crumbled. So that was why he was there. And there's a lot of stuff from Goya. There's a lot of drawings of him putting young women with old hags. So that's one of the first things that, we see. That's a direct reference to a lot of Goya's caprichos. And there's always also going to be a lot of reference to the Disasters of War series that Goya did, where he depicted a lot of atrocities and scenes that happened during the Napoleon invasion of Spain. Corpses crushed, people firing cannons, soldiers torturing people, soldiers raping women, that sort of stuff. It all appears in this play one way or another.
And the way that it's set up so that Goya can be an observer of everything is that they think he's dead. And the reason they think he's dead is one of the trio of thieves stole his coat and then got sort of crushed by the falling debris from the house, and his face got smushed. So,
right.
So all they see is they see his jacket on a guy with his head all mashed in, and so everybody thinks Goya is dead, and he notices this, but he doesn't. He doesn't reveal himself to everyone right away, because he spends a lot of time observing what's going on.
Yeah. So that's great. Kind of appears underneath some rubble or something, and then he looks around when people are saying, "Hey, look, what happened here? There's a guy, there's a secretary who is trying to make love to the lady in waiting to the Duchess." And all of a sudden he's still trying to kiss her even after the walls are crumbled and everything's
yeah.
And he's like, "Hey, what was that?" Which
that's
kind of
Jolie and Louisa, I think, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's it. Louisa. Right. Did I say Louisa was the Duchess? If I did, I'm sorry.
No, you didn't. I think you said her name right.
But the guy has his pants down to his ankles, and it's almost a moment of like, did I rock your world, baby? And she's like, wait, what was that? And they're standing in a room with no walls all of a sudden, and she says, I heard some whistling. I thought it was the little servant kid who had found us doing this, and no, it was just a bomb whistling before it hit. So. There's a couple of characters here who are historical, actually. There's the French general, Nicolas Philippe Guye. He actually was a historical general. And Goya did paint
he's portrayed a lot better than some of the other soldiers.
Yeah. He actually, in terms of, knowing what to do and standing up for unjust atrocities and stuff, he's kind of like... He's a very military, he's a general. So, yeah, of course. He's very efficient, military-style man, and he's no-nonsense kind of guy. And Goya did paint his portrait in around 1810.
Oh.
And this play is supposed to be sometime in 1811 or something, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, it's June 1811 in the countryside, a few miles outside Madrid. Yeah, so when he says in the play, Goya says, "Oh yeah, that's General Guye. I painted his portrait. He should recognize me." That means that he's referring to the painting that would have been done like the year before of General Guye, who was a French general.
When the cannon went off and blew up the house, Goya saw everybody say, like you said, saying, "Oh, what's going on?" And he kind of got up and ran off, and only the old mother saw him, and she's yelling that she saw a ghost.
Yeah. She says, I saw a ghost. And then people say, I found the corpse here. It's Goya.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, yeah, I saw his ghost.
Yeah.
Donna Pasquale.
Yeah, but because she says a lot of crazy stuff, nobody listened to her.
The Duke is referred to as a vacant-eyed, inbred nobleman whose desolate look is exacerbated by the gray clothes he favors. So, yeah, the Duke is meant to represent this very common criticism of Spanish nobility, where they all have the same kind of like face, and they all have certain inbred features, whether it's the nose or the lips or whatever. That definitely the Habsburg chin. I would say it's the kind of style that they refer to certain noble people, because they all married within each other's families, and then Greek families and Spanish families and French families, and there were all very few people in there, but there was a lot of soft-brained aristocrats at the time.
Yeah. It was hard at first to keep track of all the different servant characters. I think Jolie and Louisa were introduced to first, and Caxa, who is a stable boy, I think.
Yeah, right? Stable man, yeah.
Yeah, or stable man.
I know, it's a really complicated thing. Let's just go broad strokes on this.
And Felipe Falco is a more important one later on.
Right, yes. Felipe and Nathaniel Falco, they're both brothers, and one of them is more soft-spoken. He's got the long hair and the shaved face. He's like, I like working for rich people, it's comfortable. Yeah. And Felipe is the revolutionary secret rebel who's like, these aristocrats are all crap, and I should be with the rebels. And he actually disappears for a lot of this play because he's sent out for speaking subversion. In brief strokes here, if we're going to get lost in the details. So what happened at the beginning was that there were, like you said, 3 thieves, right? One of them was stealing the silverware. And he's the guy who's already like smushed underneath the beam, and he's got a lot of silverware in his shirt. And eventually he dies while the characters are talking and going through the rubble. The second one was the guy who got smushed
wearing Goya's coat.
Yeah. He said, "Oh, this guy liked good clothing." That's what Goya says after further down the play. But that's why that everybody thinks that Goya's dead, is because, like you said, his head is smushed, and but he's wearing Goya's coat with the lacy sleeves. Yeah. And everybody's like, "Oh my God, it's Goya. Oh, what a loss," because he's such a popular artist at the time and such a well-known, the court painter, which he wasn't, he was for a long time. But, I feel like at this time here, he's probably no longer the court painter, because it seems like this is at the later stage of his life. And then there's a third thief who's actually an actor. That's Castropol. And he's the guy who allegedly took the Duchess outside to, have his way with her. But the truth is, he's an actor, and he was hired by the Major Domo Santiago, right? Yeah. The guy who works for the Duke.
It's a complicated plot that Castropol is supposed to, as an actor, seduce her, break her heart, and then he'll be around to sort of pick up the pieces, and then he can win the Duchess himself.
Yeah. So there's a big conspiracy going in by the Major Domo.
And the Major Domo is the one who sort of exiled Felipe from the house for talking subversion, and that comes back later to haunt him.
Oh boy, does it ever.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, there's a bunch of aristocrats here, and none of them lifts a finger to do anything about the rubble, but there's Madame Delvaux, there's a captain, and there's a general. So these people, they mostly just walk around being aristocratic and just being snotty and snobbish.
Yeah.
The real meat of the play is in the lower standing people and their relationships and the things that they say. Like at one point, there's a troupe of actors that shows up as well, because they saw what happened, and they're like, well, and they're also looking for Castropol because he's one of the members of their company, and he stole all their money, and he disappeared, and they're looking for Castropol.
Yeah.
And they just think they could come over to the scene of destruction and maybe, entertain the soldiers and make some money.
Oh, God.
Unfortunately, they're not interested, and it goes terribly wrong.
Yeah. I mean, Castropol, there's a lot of, morally questionable characters in this play, but he is the worst. He is just awful. And there's the one scene where I think Eva is talking to him and, about how he stole from them and they're going to give him one more chance. And he's set up a chance for them to perform in front of the soldiers. And she's like, oh, thank you so much. And she gives him a hug, and it's like, oh God, he's just such a terrible person.
He's a weasel. He's a charmer. He's like a snake. He's
leading them to their deaths, and he's like, ugh.
Yeah, he reminds me of the character in The Magician. He reminds me of Cagliostro as depicted by Barker.
Yeah.
He reminds me of the devil in the History of the Devil. This is a typical character for Clive Barker plays. The guy who's a real charmer and a sweet talker, and he can be anything he wants, and he's very protean, and he can change his personality according to what he wants to do. And in this play, at least, we see him get a little bit of a comeuppance. But like you said, so ultimately what he was doing was he's just interested in money. He's just interested in money, and he's interested in having his own kicks, but he's not really committed to any of that. So he tricks the Duchess into believing that he's in love with her and that they're going to escape together and all that stuff. But really, this is all the conspiracy that Santiago, the major domo, set up to have him seduce her, make love to her a few times, get her all, crazy about him, and then disappear, take money away, and just break her heart so he can swoop in and hopefully seduce her.
Well, and all of that stuff, is one thing, but there's another side of him too, that anyone who knows who he is, he conspires to murder them, right? Like, like that other thief that was caught, that got kind of smashed up stealing the silverware, and there's a spoon jammed in his chest.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
He strangles him to death.
Right.
He pretends to be a doctor and says, "Oh, I'm gonna help him out," and then he goes and strangles him and comes back saying, "Oh, he didn't make it." Right.
When everybody's still at the beginning trying to figure out where Goya is and digging up and finding people in the rubble, he shows up. Hey, I'm a doctor. He got a fake beard and a coat, and he goes to see the Novik.
Yeah, Novik.
It's Novik. And then he sees that, with this heat, my brother, you're going to start babbling. So, I'm sorry about this. And he's like, wait, what? And then he kind of like strangles him. It's a little bit like the Cronenberg in Nightbreed, right? He's like, oh, I'll do what I can, but I need to have privacy. And then he goes and he takes care of Narcisse.
Yeah.
Same thing here. He goes in. He's like, hey, it's me, Castropol. He's like, oh, Castropol. Oh, and it's like, yeah, man, you're dying, and I can't have you like expose who I am, because the dead guy, the guy who's dying, is trying to speak loudly to Castropol to help him, and that's when he just kills him. And I think the conspiracy that he does to kill the members of his own troupe, though, he didn't think they were going to actually get killed. Because what he does is actually gets caught by the troupe of actors. And they say, Castropol, what are you doing here? It's like, oh, yeah, I'm pretending to be a doctor. I had the favor that was called on me by Santiago, and I was just here to seduce the Duchess. But I'm going to try. I'm sorry that I stole all your money, but I'm going to see if I can get you guys to perform for the soldiers. And they're like, yeah, we already asked the general. He said he doesn't want it. It's like, well, I'll convince him. You can play the play of the bandit, and you can go get your wooden swords and put on your your costumes and your cloaks and your masks, and I'll get the soldiers to come here. And then he goes to tell the general that there's rebels in the ruins, and that they're there, and that they got swords and they got masks, and the soldiers come. And they just, in the dark, they think, oh, there's rebels there. There they are. Shoot them. And they guillotine them. Not guillotine them. What am I saying?
He totally was trying to get them murdered.
Well, he wanted them to get arrested. Because at one point you see that there's a line here that he says, here, go arrest them. It's like, oh, no, we're going to string them up. And he's like, well, is that necessary?
Okay.
So I think he thought they were just going to get arrested and he could get away. But unfortunately, the French... the French have a little bit of a bloodlust going, and what do you call that thing? That they bayonet them and they fight swords. And the guy fighting the sword from the theater is like, hey, no, this is like a wooden sword. Look, see, he breaks a sword over his knee, and the soldiers go like, and sticks him with a sword, and they kill pretty much everyone except for one one woman, I think, Serafina.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think
Did she also
that's
die?
right. Serafina
Yeah.
is still alive, and there's maybe one other guy, and I can't remember which one.
Castropol is the worst.
Yeah, he is, and he gets it pretty much last. I mean, you expect him to get killed or much sooner, but he's like you said, he's a weasel, and so he's able to weasel out of stuff.
But another reference here to Goya's art is the aristocrats. When they show up, they have a blind man with a guitar. That's also a reference to a Goya painting of a blind man with a guitar playing for the crowds. And there's like a guy in a yellow outfit giving him a coin. There's so many of those like paintings of a blind man playing a guitar. Like Picasso has one, right? Like Picasso has the poor man playing the guitar, and it looks like he's just hanging. It looks like he's propped up just with his shoulders like squared off, and he's playing a guitar with his head falling to the side.
And so there's another one too. Who is the guy that his wife was smashed kind of down in the cellar, and so he cuts her open and takes out the baby and starts eating.
Right, it's Raphael. Yeah,
Raphael. Yeah, and it's a reference to
he's the gardener.
Saturn eating his son. The painting, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Good catch. Yeah, I know. I was going to bring that up. Yes, exactly, because the myth goes that Saturn, or in Greek is Kronos. He's the Lord of Time. He's the one. In the Greek myths, there was the god of the underworld, and there was Gaia, and there was love. And so when Gaia and the god of the underworld fell in love, that's when, Gaia gave birth to a lot of stuff, including titans and gods and time and all that stuff. And then Saturn, or Kronos, he knew about a prophecy that one of his sons was going to overtake him. So in order to prevent that from happening, every time his wife had a son, he would gobble him up. And at one point...
That should be grounds for divorce.
I know. But at one point, I think the myth goes that what's the name of Kronos' wife? I forgot. But anyway, what was the name of his wife? Anyway, so Rhea, I think it's Rhea. Rhea was pregnant with Zeus or Jupiter at the time, and she said, "I'm gonna go to Crete, and I'm gonna give birth to the son in that island, and I'll bring it back to you." And Saturn was like, okay. And so she went to Crete, gave birth to Zeus, and then grabbed a rock and wrapped it up and gave it to Saturn, I'm sorry. And Saturn said, okay, he swallowed the rock. And it turns out Zeus was raised, and when he became like a young man, he came over and he like castrated Saturn and threw the genitals into the sea where Venus came up from. And then he gave Saturn a drink that would make him vomit. So he vomited his other 6 brothers, and that was the end of it.
And there's the pantheon.
Yeah, there's the pantheon. Yep, and Zeus is the king because he released them all. So, but that was one of Goya's black paintings,
right?
The Saturn devouring his son, which was never meant to be a painting to be in a gallery or to be seen by anyone. So the black paintings period of Goya was when he was living in his little farm on the outskirts of Madrid. I think it was called the Quinta del Sordo, which means the farm of the deaf guy. And it's actually not named after him. It's named after the other guy who owned the farm before he bought it, who was also deaf. So
and this painting was hung in his dining room.
He actually painted it on the walls. Yeah. He painted the walls, the plaster inside the house. So whenever you see a black painting or those like black paintings that you can find online that ended up becoming some of his most famous ones or most well known, they were just stuff he painted on the walls of his own house. Yeah. Yeah.
And they're more disturbing than the stuff he painted for people.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, he himself said in letters to other friends of his, it's like, I'm just finally doing stuff that I just really want to do, and it's not really like subordinate to any sort of audience, and it's just stuff I do for myself. And some people say that probably was just, they're not even finished, that it was just stuff that he made, and it's very crude. But at the same time, if you look at some of those paintings, it's amazing how just a few strokes of the brush, he makes like a face, and it looks so creepy and so amazing at the same time. Even if you call it unfinished, I mean, to me, that looks almost finished. That looks like he knew exactly what he was going to do, and he did it.
Like that Saturn devouring his son painting looks like somebody wandered into a cave and turned and put a lantern up, and there's this golem-looking creature getting caught eating something that he shouldn't be eating.
Yeah, he's all gangly, and his hair is all like messed up,
and his eyes are all wide.
Yeah, and if you look at his eyes, there's also, to people who say that's unfinished, I mean, just look at the detail on his face, because one of the eyes is kind of surprised and the other one is kind of afraid. Mm-hmm. So it's like he has this compulsion to eat his kids, and he knows it's horrible, but he can't stop himself.
Yeah. And it's different from the story, because he paints, what he's painted is like he's taken bites out of him, his head's missing, and his arm is missing,
and his fingers are crushing into the torso of the body.
Yeah, and blood's coming out.
But so what happens in the play that reflects this painting is that so Felipe and Raphael, the Saturn eating his son reference that you were making a while ago, was from that scene that you brought up, which is when Raphael comes out of the ground and he has his unborn baby. So what happened here was when the house crumbled down, right? So Raphael is trying desperately to find his wife, Daniela. And Felipe, one of the Falco brothers, is also trying to help him find her, because they both have a connection to her, because they used to, all three of them would have their fun. He would share their bed. Felipe would share Daniela and Raphael's bed. And Daniela is pregnant. And so he's desperately trying to find her. And when he does find her, it's a horrible thing. He goes under the ground and he discovers her body, and he comes up blinded with grief, mad with pain, and he has taken the corpse of his child from the damaged body of his wife that he found in the basement, crushed, and he's actually taken a couple of bites off the baby, because he says it wasn't safe for the baby to be outside. It's better to be inside him.
Yeah.
And that's the moment where people are like, oh, no, he's a cannibal. He's lost his mind. And then people are looking for him. They're looking for the cannibal. But Felipe actually takes Raphael away from the house to try to save his sanity and try to get him cleaned up and try to get him like his senses straight.
Right.
And so that's the part where, obvious reference to Saturn eating his sons, which is very well done. Who actually blew up the house was the Spanish rebels. Because they didn't like the fact that French generals were there. And this is a common thing. I mean, a lot of Spanish aristocrats ended up being collaborators with the French.
Oh, and this duke, the house was all lavish with French decor, and he was a big fan of French stuff, and he was obviously like a French collaborator.
Yeah. Francophile. Even his gardens looked like Fontainebleau. And
in a way, he was sort of asking for it.
Yeah. And Goya was also facing a lot of that stuff in real life. Goya, being the court painter after the invasion of the French in Spain, he remained in contact with that sort of aristocracy, and he still made paintings of them, including paintings of French generals and stuff. But then after the Restoration, he was kind of pardoned. He was kind of pardoned for the accusations of maybe being a collaborator. And it's like, he was just a painter. There was that kind of stuff. And then once the King of Spain at that time, was it something the fourth or whatever? The son of the guy who had made him the court painter. Yeah. He did pardon Goya, but then he never made any commission from him. And that's, that was the end of his court painter career, I guess. So from then on, he just went on to work on his own, disasters of war, his caprichos. He did more portraits. And then eventually at the end of his life, he asked that king of Spain if he could go to Bordeaux to a spa because of his health. And the king said, you know what, I'll give you permission to do that. And he's like, yoink. He went to France, and he stayed there in exile for the rest of his life until he died. So, and then he would paint portraits of his friends there, his circle of Spanish friends who were also in exile and stuff. But that was the end of Goya. This play is really, really interesting. I read it last night and this morning, and it really picks up more when the coffin maker and his daughter arrive on the scene, right?
Yeah, and the daughter, in a way, is a sort of a co-conspirator with Goya. She protects his secret of being actually alive. She doesn't tell anyone, even though she's one of the people making the coffin and helping to set up the funeral for Goya.
Yeah, he shows up with two nuns, two sisters of Jerusalem, who found Goya after he ran away from the broken house. They found him in the street reeling, and they're like, oh, he must have come from that burning house there, and they brought him back. And the only person who was there was Jolie and I think Barbara and maybe someone else. And then they're like, so who are you? And he's like, I'm Goya. No, you're not. Goya's right there. He's dead. He looks at the coffin, looks at the coat and says, yep, that's Goya. That's Goya's clothes. And that's when he kind of keeps up this charade, even though he keeps saying he's Goya. Yeah. But the people think he's crazy, so they don't take him seriously. Yeah. And then he even says, oh, well, he reaches into the coffin, takes off the glasses off the dead man's mushed face, puts them on his own face, and is like, oh, yeah, now I can see better. And even though they say, hey, put that back, that's not yours.
He's like, well, he doesn't need it.
Yeah, he doesn't need them anymore.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very funny, a very funny sequence of dialogue here. I don't like the nuns.
Yeah.
They're just pinched and petty, and they treat Barbara poorly because she's nobody. She's a nobody. But there is a little bit of a supernatural moment here when the coffin maker says that Barbara, his daughter, she can sense the dead, because when she gets on the scene, she says, oh, there's many people buried here. And they're like, oh, she can sense the dead? Yeah. And that's when she says, oh, over underneath me, I think I sense not really two people, more like one person and one not yet formed person. And that's when Raphael goes like, my Daniela, and that's when he goes underneath the basement to find her.
Is she alive? And she says, I can only sense dead people. I can't sense living ones.
So that's the only concession to like either supernatural or superstition or whatever. She ends up being right.
There's one thing that I didn't quite understand, though. There's a little bit of stage direction in here about I think women taking away bodies, and they're sort of laughing, and it's this conspiratorial way. But I didn't quite figure out who they were or what that was about.
Okay, yeah, the three women.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those three women, there are drawings of Goya where three women show up, and usually they're witches.
Okay.
Sometimes they're like flying with a man and eating his flesh. Sometimes they're, three witches around a fire, or three old hags. I think this is just my interpretation of it, because they seem to be just related to the act of carrying the dead around in the whole play. They show up at the beginning. You see that there's three women there. They're kind of in the shadow. They don't really do anything, and then they leave. Next time you see them, they're carrying dead people and putting them in the fire.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're the three fates, right? They're the ones who sever the lifeline of people, like in Macbeth or something like that. So that's what I took them to be a representation of. I'm not sure if I'm correct.
Yeah. Well, that could be, and that would make sense then to tie into his paintings.
Yeah, but Santiago's a complicated character here. He's like a fixer. He's like a very pale, pasty, dark clothed. I don't know what to call him, but he seems like a very pinched man.
Yeah. He's
got his own kinks. Like, he likes to be flogged, which is something that gives him some retribution in one scene from sending Felipe away for subversion. Felipe does come back to the ruins at night, and he finds that Caxa, the horse, the stableman, is doing something that Santiago pays him to do, which is sometimes he just wants Caxa to flog him, especially when he feels like he's being naughty and he's gotten away with it.
Yeah.
He says, well, I need to pay for this because my plan is going according to plan, and the Duke is mortified, and I'm about to make a deal to sell the Duke's collection of art, what's left of it, to Goya's son, which we'll get into. The Goya's family comes to see the corpse.
Right, yeah, exactly. And the Duke's still alive at that point.
Yeah. or so we think.
Yeah.
And so he's like, okay, Coxa, just kind of flog me, no mercy. And Coxa is like, oh, okay. He's like flogging him, and all of a sudden, Felipe shows up behind him, kind of takes Coxa out.
Yeah, he punches him out.
Yeah, punches him out and grabs the whip, and then he starts like, wham, psh, wham, psh, and it's like. And Santiago's like, oh yeah, harder.
Yeah.
He's like, oh wait, not so hard. Okay,
he
stop.
must have his eyes closed, right? Because that goes on for a long time.
Yeah,
and he's like, oh no, you got to stop. You're killing me. And he doesn't know. He doesn't know that it's Felipe until he says
turns
something.
Around.
Yeah.
And then he turns around. He's like, Falco is like, yeah, I'm gonna whip you to death, you prick. And he's like, he's trying to kill him, and he's trying to get away, and he's crawling on the floor. And then Coxa goes like, help, murder.
Yeah.
And that's when the soldiers start running off, and Felipe gets away, but he gets shot and wounded in the dark. So that's. And then the Duchess shows up, and eventually, and she sees Santiago, and he's like, he's a pitiful man, he's bloodied, he's dirty. I was like, oh, no, I'm just I'll be right back, and he disappears to clean himself up. But yeah, I mean, Santiago is this kind of almost sociopathic kind of incel. He thinks that he can achieve love through deception and manipulation.
And there's another sort of a little subplot too where the Duchess is sending Castropol as the doctor to go find the Duke and convince the Duke that she was raped.
Oh yeah, because Novik, before he died, the Duke has Santiago interrogate him and says, "What happened here? You guys were thieves, and which one of you took my wife out in the field because my wife was ravaged?" And it's like, "Oh yeah, And then was she smiling when she left with the man?" And Novik says, "Yes, she was smiling." And that's what makes the Duke go crazy, because it's like, my wife has been ravaged, and I don't know if she wanted it. That's a weird thing in his mind. He's just very insecure about the infidelity of his own wife. He wants to know whether or not, I think he has his suspicions about the Duchess, because the Duchess, we find out later, had all sorts of affairs, and Santiago kind of, helped her hide that stuff along with Estella.
So my interpretation of this is, Castropol went off for a while to go visit the Duke. My interpretation is that he killed the Duke. He hung him.
Okay, so my interpretation is different, because at one point in the play it says that Castropol is confronting the Duchess, and she knows that after she knows that Santiago paid him to do that, and she says, "So when you went to the Duke shows up hung. He hung himself in a tree, right?"
Yeah, she says, "You are the last person who saw him alive."
Yeah, and she says, "You told him that I had not been raped, right? You told him that I did this." And so what is implied and what is said by another character in the play is that after Castropol went to tell the Duke, pretending to be the doctor, but telling him that, your wife wasn't raped, there's nothing wrong with her, it was consensual, and that made the Duke, with the loss of his house, the loss of his art, and now the loss of his wife's fidelity, that he got a rope and hung himself, because he sent the soldier away who was with him, after Castropol told him stuff. So it wasn't Castropol who killed him; he killed himself.
Yeah, well, he's the last person alive with him, and whether he did it by by talking him into it, or he did it by actually getting out the rope himself and doing it, it's hard.
Yeah, I get that interpretation that the Duke is a weak person. He's an insecure, weak person.
Yeah.
And that ultimately, when he found out that the doctor told him his wife was not been raped, and he sent the soldier away, and then he just kind of hung himself.
Yeah.
Because at that point, he lost everything that he wanted out of life. He wanted his art.
The Duke sent the soldier away.
Yeah, the Duke. Right.
Oh,
exactly.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, because there's a soldier that is accompanying him for his protection because of the rebels. Okay. And so that's what happened in my interpretation of it. But so the Duke killed himself. So the Duchess is now going to be rich. But let's get into Barbara and Goya and Goya's family. So Goya is still pretending to be just some guy, and nobody knows he's alive. And
his son Javier and Xavier's wife Gumercinda.
Mm-hmm.
Gumercinda. I don't know how to say that, but yeah.
Yeah.
They arrive, and Xavier seems more interested in learning about his father's estate and talking about business, the business of his father being dead, rather than grieving. And this is really kind of upsetting for Goya,
and dismissive of his father's art. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, Goya is hiding when they show up, and there's an art critic. There's Goya's son and Goya's wife.
Yeah.
And the art critic, it's funny because he's painted as this very kind of dandy-looking, frail guy who faints when he sees a corpse, and it's like, oh, and he falls over.
Yeah,
and it's like, oh, I will make his work with my epitaph. I will make his work double the price. And it's like, oh boy, yeah. The son doesn't seem to be very sad. Doesn't have any tears. The wife seems more fascinated by looking at a corpse than actually sad that her father-in-law is dead.
Yeah.
And Goya reads the lips of his son talking about how at first the son says, why is my dad's coffin in here in the middle of this rubble and destruction? It should be out in the lawn. But then he corrects himself and says, you know what? Maybe my dad would have liked to be in this desolation and this garbage and this, rot, because that's all he was doing lately. It was just all these like horrible things. We can't even sell that stuff. It was all like, war crimes and horrible dark paintings and stuff. It's like, yeah, my dad loved that stuff. It's like, but he says that kind of contemptuously.
Yeah.
Like you said, more concerned about how are we going to get rid of all those horrible paintings that he's been making, because nobody wants that stuff.
Right. And how can I get money out of this death?
Yeah. Yeah. And so Goya's like, oh no, it's like, oh, better for me to just stay dead than, going back to that family that doesn't love me.
And he decides he also wants to wait until his wife arrives, and she hasn't left yet. She's doing something back at home. But when she arrives, he's going to see her reaction to the funeral or to the coffin, and then he'll decide about, revealing himself.
That's right. That's why he keeps up the charade for a while longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on. But Barbara, the coffin maker's daughter, she talks to Goya. She also is the one who falls in love with Felipe, because Felipe does return a few times into different acts of the play. And I think at one point they go off and they have sex off camera, off stage. Yeah,
that's before he got shot.
Yeah. And now she's concerned about Felipe's fate, so Felipe eventually gets caught, and then he gets tortured by the French soldiers, and you can hear him scream off stage when they're like, can I interrogate him? And the colonel's like, yeah, okay. Oh, the general goes, yeah, okay, you can go interrogate him if you want. It's like, that's going to be fun.
Not the general, it was the captain.
Captain. Yeah. The captain, right? Then the sergeant is the one who goes to interrogate him.
Yeah.
And so the sergeant obviously is a psychopath. He's got this gleam in his eyes, and
he said, I just want to shoot somebody. There's one monologue or a dialogue where he's talking to another soldier, and he says, man, I just really want to shoot somebody. I want to shoot somebody right in the head.
Yeah. He's the psychopath. And so, you keep hearing these screams of Felipe off camera. Yeah. And Barbara pleads to Goya to stop that. And then he eventually reveals himself to the general, Guye. And he says, hey, general, it's me. Goya? Yes, it's me. Yeah. Well, then who's that guy? It's like, some thief who stole my coat. And it's like, hey, look, that guy is being tortured. And, can you just, for my sake, like not let them do that. Keep some rigor in this time of war or whatever he says. And he goes over and he kind of pulls the sergeant away from the prisoner and kind of like backhands him as like, you're dishonor to your like uniform. You lost your stripes, and we'll shoot the prisoner at dawn. And so that kind of gets Philippe a little bit of a reprieve.
And Goya and Barbara sort of conspire. They put him into a coffin when he's still alive, so that he can escape later with Barbara.
Right. Well, there's another scene where the sergeant hasn't given up yet. And, he wants to do the firing squad even before dawn, right? So he just wants to shoot him right there and then. And then there's a scene where Raphael returns. So Raphael, the guy who went crazy and tried to eat his own baby, he was taken by Felipe to the river to wash himself up, and Felipe convinced him to bury the baby, and he kind of like helped him snap out of it a bit. And so that's when Raphael eventually at night returns to the property. And it's around the time when he knows that Felipe is about to be shot by firing squad. And what he does is, since people were still kind of freaked out over the cannibal that got away and the soldiers were trying to find him, he goes just as the guys are prepared to shoot Felipe. He goes into the basement again where his wife's body was, and he takes a lamp. He sets the basement on fire. And he comes out covered in muck, holding pieces of human flesh and howling just before the firing squad shoots. And this is where it pays off, the whole conversation about the French being very superstitious. And they go like, what is that thing? It's coming out from the bowels of hell, the flames out of the hole. And, he keeps howling. Arr! And since he's holding like limbs and stuff. So it's really freaky, and the soldiers run away or fall to the ground or scatter, and one of them goes into a fetal position and, oh, no, he just kind of cries on the floor. And that's when Felipe disappears, and that's when, we later find out that there was a conspiracy for Goya to take Felipe, even though he's wounded, but put him in a coffin and stay there for a while until things, lay low. And
since Barbara's in charge of the coffins, or partly in charge of the coffins, she's able to sort of help orchestrate to get him out of there and to help him escape. Yeah.
But hey, let's go back a little bit and talk about the circus troupe when they show up in the story, because this circus troupe, it's also it's fun.
Acting troupe.
Yeah, the acting troupe. Yeah. What did I say? Circus? Oh yeah. I was thinking about the circus of Maximilian Bacchus.
Right, because there's a clown named Tongue, T-U-N-G.
It seems like Clive likes to put these troupes of very ebullient, very funny improv troupe that shows up, and they're starving artists all the time. Yeah. And they're always trying their best to be happy and joyful and do their theater, even though sometimes they're like, we don't have a job, we're starving.
Yeah. There's Eva, Holy Joe Navarro, Tongue, the Clown, Serafina, Geronimo, and Violante.
Yeah. They're amazing. They show up when these three soldiers are keeping watch at a fire near Goya's coffin. And one of them brings a snake. And it's like, hey, I got dinner. And the other guys are like, oh, that's gross. And it's like, yeah, whatever. I'm going to fry this up. It tastes like chicken. And while that happens, that's when they see this weird papier-mâché giant head covered in a cloth. And these people in masks and robes, they show up around them in the ruins. And they're like, oh, my God, we're surrounded. What the heck is this? Yeah. And here's another cool thing. It's that, of course, the head, it's almost like the head of a giant, right? And before this happens, in the previous scene, Goya gets so upset about the way his family reacted to his dead body that he decides that he needs to be alone for a while. And he starts talking about, when I was a child, I thought that my town was in the back of this slumbering giant. And this giant would one day wake up because someone did something, and he would stand up, and all of our town would fall off of his back with all the trees and all this stuff, and he would just wake up and walk away.
And that's what the play is titled after, is that Colossus from his dreams. Even
the poster for this play at the time in 1983 was a drawing from Goya. It was a lithograph from Goya. It's called A Giant, and it's a giant sitting on a hill. And now I'm looking at it, I don't know for sure if this is the actual Goya lithograph or this is...
Or maybe it's Clive's?
Yeah, no, it is Goya's. Yeah, it is Goya's, because I have it right here. And he goes into the basement, that weird basement door where Daniela's body was in, And he goes in there and he's like, I'll take a lamp and I'll go in there and I'll just see if I can find that giant and wake him up. And if I can find his face and talk to it. And they're like, all right, dude, whatever. We'll see you in a bit. So he goes in the basement and disappears. But yeah, so it's funny because that giant paper mache head that they bring, the acting troupe, is almost like the head of a giant. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, okay. That's like the Colossus. That's like the giant's head. And so the acting troupe reveals itself to the soldiers. It's like, hey, we're just actors. You guys want to see a play? And the captain's like, nah, we don't need to see a play. Fiction is something that keeps us from the system.
Well, it's kind of similar to like what people say about video games, right? That it corrupts your mind and
right, exactly. Yeah, and then at one point, one of the guys actually points out to the captain and says, "Well, you're acting right now. Your uniform is kind of a costume, right?" And I think they're calling him out on his smug, presumptuous kind of stance, like that it's all an act as well, because everybody acts in that position. So yeah, but he says, "Yeah, no, we don't want it." But they're like, "Hey, but I smell something good." And at that point, the soldiers seem to have lost interest in the snake because like, I'm not eating that. And they're like, hey, there's something here. There's food, and they jump in and grab the pan and they start eating the snake and say, hey, this is chicken. And then someone says, is there bread? And it's like, well, I got some bread here. Give me the bread. And they start eating it and they kind of, fall like vultures over the pan. And then
they've been marching, or they've been not marching, but, traveling for a while and they haven't eaten.
Yeah. And there's a flagon of wine that they also drink. And the soldier's like, hey, that was our dinner. But yeah, that just goes to show how hungry they were and how poor they are because Castropol took all their money. It's funny how acting troops in Clive's plays always kind of feel similar. Yeah. Similar to Maximilian Bacchus's circus.
Yeah. This particular troupe, it's like don't get too excited about or don't get to know them too well because they're not going to last very long.
Yeah. But, there's one of them, I think it's Serafina. She kind of glares at the captain because she knows his face. Because one time she was a nun, and the way she ended up in this troop is that Napoleon's troops came over, destroyed the convent, and raped a bunch of nuns, including her. Yeah. And so she recognizes his face. And she confronts him a little bit about that, but he goes away after that. He doesn't care. Yeah. So, yeah, that's a very tragic scene.
Yeah, the captain is awful. I mean, the general is decent enough person, but the captain is pretty terrible. So I guess where we could go next is this giant head, from the troupe of actors. Becomes significant because towards the end when Castropol is revealed, to everybody figures out that he's the thief or they're chasing after him, and the Duchess says, "Oh, you could hide in that head," and then she tells the soldiers where he's hiding.
Yeah. Because at that point in the play, Santiago has told the Duchess. Yeah, you shouldn't waste your time on Castropol because I paid him to seduce you. He's nothing but an artist. He doesn't care about you, and I love you. And the Duke is dead, so why don't you should marry me? I'm rich. I got a fortune now, and I have some deals going on. And yet she's like, no. Yeah. And when she sees Castropol, she confronts him and she's like, you're a scumbag. And the troops are chasing Felipe, so they're shooting everywhere and they're trying to find a guy running away. And Castropol shows up on the scene and it's like, what's going on? You told them something about me, didn't you? And he's like, and she acts like they're looking for him, even though they're looking for Felipe. And she says, yeah, you should hide in that big head. Yeah. And he's like, okay, I'll be there. I'm watching you. I'll be watching you from that head. And the soldiers show up and it's like, we're looking for a running man. Did you see him? No, I didn't see any man, but I'm just standing here. but
the person
I'm being watched.
The person you're looking for is watching me or something. There, she says, "Your glory is watching me right now."
And they kind of look at the big head, and they're like, look at her, and they nod, and they go like, yeah, and they go around the head, and they stick their bayonets through the ears of the head, and Castor Paul's arms shoot out of the eye sockets like, oh, and they just go limp, and so she got him killed. She got her revenge.
Yeah, and it's a kind of for that character, it's about time. He wanted him to die sooner than that.
Yes, yeah. But we skipped a lot of stuff in this play, but it's a very thick play. I've read it yesterday and today, and it goes to like 130 pages.
It's 147.
Yeah, 147. That's right. Yeah. So it's almost like a book. It's actually a book. You could turn this into, I was going to say a movie, but honestly, yeah, it's a play. I mean, what else am I going to say? It would be a great play to watch. It would be pretty long. It would need a lot of people, but
it's I love all the 2 hours or more.
Yeah, I love all the subplots that are going through this, and the way that things are neatly wrapped in a bow. And of course, the common theme for the plays in Incarnations, including Frankenstein and Love and the History of the Devil, is the lovers are reunited at the end, and this is what happens here because as the three women and Donna Pasquale are throwing bodies, especially the bodies of the acting troupe, into the fire, which at one point the general says, I don't like this. This feels like an atrocity because the captain lied to him. He said they were rebels, and they took the wooden swords and they put metal swords, and they put some weapons in there and doctor the scene because they killed them by mistake. So they're like, oh, shit, how am I going to explain this? I need to make a report. And so he's like, well, we'll just say they were actual rebels because they were kind of dressed like rebels. We'll just drop some weapons in here and tell that to the general. And then they say, well, let's get rid of the evidence. Why don't we just start burying the bodies, burning the bodies? Mm-hmm. And then at one point, someone decides that, all those coffins of the dead people that died in the house when they crumbled, we should also burn them too because it's hot and the flies are here. And so the three women are burning bodies. The three kind of fates are taking them off and getting them out of this world of the play. At one point, Goya says to Barbara, don't let them burn the coffins just yet. And she's like, okay. So at one point, the three women bring a coffin, and they're about to take it to the fire. He says, don't take that to the fire. And they're like, why? Because I want to draw the coffin. And they're like, okay, you're weird. So they go off to the fire to take care of other corpses, and he tells Barbara, here, help me get this off because there's not a lot of air in these things. And he pulls it off, and it actually is Felipe gasping for air. Yeah. And he's like, and it's like, he's wounded. Yeah. But he says, but I'll live. And so Barbara ends up leaving with Felipe. The Duke is dead. The Duchess is a widow. Santiago is not going to marry her. Yeah. And Goya's wife comes to see the body, right? Goya's wife comes to see the body at one point. And that's when he looks at her. This is something that happens a little earlier. But Josefa, his wife, with whom he had 6 kids, and only the last one survived. Jeez. So that some critics say that Saturn eating his sons could also be a reference to all the 5 kids that he lost. And then only the last one survived, Javier. So Josefa shows up and looks at the corpse in the coffin, and he says, "Oh my God, is she crying?" She's not crying, and then she's like, "Yeah, that's not Goya. That's not him. I'm not sad because that's not him. Look at his nails. Yeah. His nails were always bitten to the quick, and these nails have been recently cut and manicured. That's not your father." And he goes like, "Oh yeah, she knows me. She knows who I am." She says, "He's alive." And he shows up and he's like, "Yes, my wife, I am alive." And the son is like, "What?" Wife is happy and he's like, "Come into my arms, wife, where you belong." So, Goya's happy. He's back with his wife. Everybody knows he's alive now. Yeah. So, it's a good ending.
It was a good ending. I hadn't read this since '95, so I didn't remember much about it. I was happy to see that there was that the wife actually did love him, and she wasn't going to end up being like the son.
Yeah. But he says, as for my son, he's like, I'm not going to write him out of the will.
Yeah.
There's something here. I forgive him, but I'm not going to write him out of the will. And then it ends with Barbara helping Felipe out of the coffin. Morning is coming. The dawn light is gleaming through the smoke. And then Goya asks, what kind of world is this? And then after a moment, Barbara says, ours. And the birds sing, lights go down, play ends. So that's a lovely ending.
Yeah, I would have loved, I know that the plan for these playbooks being released was that more people could start making productions of these plays. And there was some, but I would have loved to have seen any of them or any and all of them, but I never got the chance living where I do. But you at least you got to see History of the Devil. Yeah,
by a troupe of naked theater, which was amazing.
Yeah.
That was the only time I saw a Clive Barker play. That's quite an experience. Very long play too, but it felt short. It felt short to me. Even though at the beginning the director was like, this is going to be kind of long. It's going to be like 1.5 hours for the first act. Then the second part's going to be another 2 hours and something. But I was like, man, I wish I could have seen it again. It was amazing.
And I think the ones that have actually been produced, other than by Clive Barker, of course, Frankenstein in Love, History of the Devil, Crazy Face, right? I think we talked about that one.
Absolutely.
Is that it? Since after the Dog Company plays that have been...
Well, there was Secret Life of Cartoons that ended up being done by other people in the...
Did it?
Yeah. Yeah, the Secret Life of Cartoons had a pretty successul run in the West End or something. Yeah.
Oh.
And was not done by the Dog Company.
Yeah, that's cool. That's kind of that's almost like a Who Framed Roger Rabbit type of a thing.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this, reading this again. I almost didn't remember anything of this play since 1995. But I was very happy to reread it. And let me see. I got some notes here.
It felt the same to me. It felt like reading it for the first time.
Definitely. I had a really good morning, just waking up a little early, finishing reading the play. And I grabbed my Goya book, and I found some interesting stuff. And one of them is that the next play in the book, Frankenstein in Love, the revolutionary guy is called Coco.
Yeah.
And in my book, here's a engraving of Goya with a drawing saying "Que viene el Coco," which means the Coco is coming. It's a mother kind of smiling at a hooded figure, while the two kids are terrified and their arms are outstretched trying to escape the mother. The Coco is what the Spanish people call the boogeyman.
Oh,
so she's kind of trying to scare her kids into being, into behaving by saying, "Oh, the Coco is coming to get you." So that's funny because Coco is in Frankenstein in Love.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then let's see, what else did I note here? Cool. The Colossus. So there's several depictions of the Colossus in Goya's work. One of them is an actual painting, and it was made around 1808 or 1812. So it might have taken like 2 or 3 years for him to make it. And it says here, of all the works of Goya's maturity, the Colossus is one of the most dramatic, poetic, and enigmatic. Its visual beauty, mysterious power, and the multiplicity of interpretations to which its deliberate ambiguity lends itself make it extraordinarily appealing. Even the dating is conjectural. In October 1812, it was listed simply as un gigante, a giant. In an inventory of paintings, Goya, after the death of his wife, Josefa, bequeathed to his son, Javier. This enables us to establish at least the date by which his work must have been executed. You can look this up, the Colossus. You'll find this painting, I'm sure. Yeah. It's a big, muscly man with a beard and dark hair,
sitting
dark
on
skin.
The ground, kind of squatting.
No, this one is walking.
Oh.
Yeah, he's walking through a valley, and there's a village and several people running away from him, cattle, people, carts, townspeople running away. It says, the Colossus has always provoked astonishment and surprise because of its strange blend of the ordinary and the fantastic. The imposing giant, with his back to us, the lower part of his body lost in fog, the left hand clenched in a fist in a seemingly threatening posture. He's kind of like, his left arm is kind of like, has his fist raised up, and it looks like he's walking, like his legs are spread out, is like a blind force that does not perceive the fear of the multitude that is fleeing through the valley. The ambiguity of the image does not allow us to determine whether the giant is walking or whether buried to the knees. And there's another painting that Goya did, which is two guys buried in sand to their knees, hitting each other with cudgels. And fight with cudgels. And that is very symbolic of, Civil War, two men who look like they could be brothers. They look very similar. And they're just kind of like stuck in sand up to their knees. And they're both like, swinging cudgels at each other. And they got blood running down their faces. It's one of those things that could show, how people just keep fighting each other instead of, building something together. It's the futility of that sort of conflict. Yeah. The painting seems to depict something like the birth or awakening of a powerful and irrepressible force emerging from the bowels of the earth rather than the frightening approach of a giant. So it seems like that's what Goya was saying in the play. Like, I dreamt once that this village was on the back of a giant, and then one day the giant wakes up and walks away. So I think Clive is directly referencing this picture and making it like a dream that Goya had. Yep, so there's that one, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I have actually an X-ray photography of the Colossus in the next page, kind of showing the evolution of it.
Oh.
Yeah, the composition changed. Initially, the giant faced the viewer with the left hand on his hip in a classical attitude that could remind of Hercules paintings. And then he decided to instead of that static pose, paint the giant walking away. So it's kind of funny because one side of the X-ray painting has the giant with his head looking, kind of sideways and his left arm raised, and he's walking away from the valley.
Yeah.
And the other half of the X-ray painting has the giant facing us with his hand on his hip, and he's just standing there with his chest tall and puffed up. So it's funny. Yeah, but I think that one is much more dynamic when he's walking away rather than just standing there in front of the people. Anyway, and then there's another Colossus, which is the one that was used for the poster of the dog company.
That's the one with him sitting on kind of squatting on the ground.
That's right. Yeah. And in the images that you can find in Revelations for the poster for the play, the poster is very low quality and the image is very small. So it seems like the head is all dark. It seems like his face is not seen to us, but in the actual aquatint that Goya made, you can see the face of the giant. He's sitting down with his back to us, but he's turning his head to us.
Yeah.
And you can see his face. Like he's kind of looking like a little bit up and back.
I found an eBay listing of somebody selling the poster for that's awesome. £5. So I've got that image. It's actually red. It's monochrome red and white.
Oh. It says here that it was an aquatint, so that means it was a copper plate that was etched with acid. And so the pictorial image, Goya probably dusted the copper plate with a resinous mixture used for aquatint and then let it be bitten by acid. If printed at that stage, the plate would produce a uniform velvety black tone. Goya then worked with a scraper and burnisher on the prepared copper plate and created the extraordinary richness of shadings in the lights and halftones, and thereby gave the figure its powerfully modeled sense of volume. Because in the aquatint, in the parts that should be just uniformly dark, that's where he also kind of scraped and buffed to make the muscles. So there's like these etched streaks that kind of make the dark parts of the giant. They give it volume. They give it like the muscle, musculature and stuff. Yeah. So it's really, really awesome. And there's another one. There's another giant. It's very cool. I think that Clive might have also seen this to reference it in the big paper mache hat that the theater troupe had. Mm-hmm. Because there's a drawing. It's a drawing. It's black chalk. And it's called Gran Colosso Dormindo. It says Great Sleeping Colossus from 1824 to 1828. And this is just a big head of a guy sleeping. And there's tiny people all around him putting ladders and walking up to his face and climbing into his mouth and nose and up to his face and the hair.
Like Gulliver's Travels. Yeah,
like that. Yeah. And says only 6 impressions of this work are known, all working proofs taken before the reported cracking of the plate occurred. Oh, actually, they're talking about the giant, the Colossus, the aquatint. So apparently this copper plate broke So that's why they only made 6 impressions of the work. So that's really rare. And then in regards to the Great Colossus sleeping, it says, Great Sleeping Colossus shows the enormous head of a giant surrounded by a multitude of tiny people, some of whom, having scaled a head, run up a flag as a sign of victory. The calm, majestic features of the face, along with the beard, are similar to those of the 2 earlier giants of the painting and the aquatint. Goya, at peace during his years of self-imposed exile in France, seems to reflect on the sadness of Spain's destiny, to which those resigned words Gran Coloso Dormido perhaps refer. So he's talking about that Colossus is sleeping as like his country falling into sleep and not fulfilling his destiny.
Yeah.
I'll try to put some links to some of these images in the show notes so people can see the portrait. Yeah.
And I have a link in the show notes to a video that I watched that was pretty helpful called The Most Disturbing Painting. And it starts out talking about the Saturn devouring his sons, but goes on to talk about Goya and his life and his paintings and stuff. So it's a like only 8 minutes, but it's a good it gives you a good background on him.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there's great documentaries about Goya too. I'll try to add some of those to the show notes. There's one in particular that's really, really good. So I'll add that to the show notes. And if you're interested in more stuff about Goya, this is the place to go. Definitely get Incarnations and Forms of Heaven. They're out-of-print books from 95, which I think you guys can still find somewhere.
Well, and watch out for this play might be released individually here by Phil and Sarah at the Clive Barker Archive.
Exactly. So this episode was kind of inspired by the recent release of another couple of theater play books by the Clive Barker Archive, which we still don't both have them all. I need to check on my order, and it should be arriving soon. But once we have them, we'll get back to that and make another theater play episode.
Yeah, well, that'll be fun. Coming up next, our next episode, we're going to be discussing this Candyman movie because it's coming out next weekend as we record this. So we'll have a spoiler-free discussion of Candyman. So if you've got anything that you want to say about the movie that's spoiler-free, send it to us or comment to us, and we'll include that in there. And then we've got a commentary for Horror of Dracula, continuing our A to Z of horror commentaries. O for Open Vein. We're going to be talking about the Hammer film, Horror of Dracula.
The 1958 movie, yes, the Horror of Dracula, also known as the Hammer Dracula film, Dracula. So,
and I've never seen that, so I'm excited about that one.
I've seen it, yeah. I've seen it on TV a couple of times. But yeah, it's going to be cool to rewatch it in good quality.
Yeah. And we're coordinating with Marcus so that we can return to the Illustrator series with Clive Barker Illustrator 2. We have our second part of that. That's what we were going to do today, actually, our second part of the interview with Doug Bradley. But he had to cancel. So that's going to be sometime in the near future. And
yeah, he rescheduled. Yeah, he hadn't confirmed this date yet, but so he just said, "Hey, let's just make it a little later." So we're still going to have Doug Bradley, which is amazing. We got a lot of stuff to discuss.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. And then we'll be returning to Jericho Squad 77.
Yay!
All right, and this podcast having no beginning will have no end.